When people talk about the legendary 6502 processor, they often think of the Apple II, or the Commodore 64, the Atari 2600, or even the NES. But what if I told you one of the last commercial machines made by Atari with a 6502 was in fact this? This is the Atari Lynx II, a handheld console released in 1991. And while it doesn't usually come up in conversations, at its heart the Lynx II is powered by a descendant of the legendary 6502 processor, the chip that kick-started the personal computer revolution. Before I can get this Atari Lynx up and running, I think we need to go back 50 years, to the beginning of the 6502's story. Our story begins in the 1970s, where microprocessors exist, but they're incredibly expensive and limited to corporate machines. Huge computers that sit inside rooms, and they're priced way out of the reach of most people, until a group of rebellious engineers decided to change that. Chuck Peddle and his team were working at Motorola when he pitched the idea of a more cost-efficient processor to the executives at Motorola. They gave him a big fat no, fearing that this would undercut their higher-priced, more premium product. So Peddle and a handful of engineers left Motorola and joined a small microprocessor company, MOS Technology. Their mission: to design and build a microprocessor for the masses. They began work on the 6502. At this early stage of their journey, little did they know that what they were doing would change the world forever and very much influence the direction of microprocessor technology for the next 50 years. First investigation on this Lynx II before we get it working is its biggest weak point, the power circuit. These consoles are infamous for power failures, leaving many non-functional. I spent some time probing around the board and have come to the conclusion that it's likely to be D13 that's causing the problem. It has a voltage drop in both directions, which for a diode is very much not normal. It should only have a voltage drop in one direction and be an open circuit in the other. Because of this diode is really no longer a diode, but to confirm that, I'm going to take it out of circuit and test it independently. The results of doing that show exactly the same thing. It has a voltage drop in both directions, so this diode is no longer a diode, and I suspect this was the failure point of this power circuit. If I bypass the power control circuit and give it 5 volts directly, the console powers up, which proves that nothing else is damaged. The industry had power problems of its own back in 1975. Computing power was locked behind high costs, keeping personal computing out of reach for most people. But that's where the 6502 changed everything. When the 6502 was launched at WestCon 1975, it sent shockwaves through the industry. This low-cost, efficient processor soon caught the eye of many amateur computer enthusiasts, and that's where Steve Wozniak gave birth to the Apple I, a computer that arguably changed everything.
What's that?
Oh, that.
It wasn't long before Commodore and Atari followed suit, using the low-cost processor in their home computer offerings. So I'm going to install this power circuit kit that I was provided by my sister with the console. First thing we've got to do is hot air off all the components that we're going to replace. I'm also going to recap the board entirely and go on to fit an aftermarket screen. This should ensure that the Lynx II runs reliably for many years to come. Working through and soldering all these components reminds me of our sponsor, PCBWay. They have high quality prototype PCB fabrication for as little as $5 and a huge range of shared projects. And if you don't feel confident waving a soldering iron around, you can get them to assemble them for you. They also have a range of other services like CNC machining, metal fabrication, and 3D printing. All this is available at PCBWay.com. Thanks PCBWay for sponsoring this video. Now let's see if we can get this Atari Lynx back up and running. By the late 1970s, the 6502 had really taken hold. Atari's 2600 games console, Commodore's PET and VIC-20 all used the 6502 processor. Commodore would go on to use a derivative of the 6502, the 6510, in its Commodore 64, the best-selling computer of all time. By the late 1980s, the 6502's dominance was starting to fade. More powerful processors like the Motorola 68000 were starting to take over in the home computing market. Yet here was the 6502 still at the core of the Atari Lynx, a console that was released at the same time as the Atari ST, a far more powerful Motorola 68000 powered machine. The second edition of the Atari Lynx was released in 1991, reducing its form factor and enhancing battery life and reliability. By this point, they were winding down production of the Atari ST range, so to think that this machine contains a 6502, something that they first looked at in the 1970s with the Atari 2600. The Atari Lynx was, by all comparisons, way ahead of its time. Its color screen and 3D style scaling effects. It really is a testament to what the processor was capable of. Unfortunately, the Lynx wasn't a commercial success in the same way as the Game Boy, Nintendo's offering, that dominated that handheld market. Most people consider the Atari Lynx's rival to be the Sega Game Gear. The Game Gear was basically a master system in a handheld form factor, using the Zilog Z80 processor. The Z80 and the 6502 were common rivals, particularly between machines in the UK like the ZX Spectrum using the Z80 and the 6502 based Acorn machines that went on to dominate the educational market. The 80s represented the heyday for the 6502. The 80s also was the heyday for these capacitors. Capacitors in the 90s really embody the phrase, "they don't make them like they used to." Attractive lower manufacturing costs from China during the 1990s led to a wave of poor quality capacitors, which inevitably leak over time. High quality replacements will see this machine work for years to come. The hardest cap to replace on this is the one that sits poking out in the middle of this shield. You'll need to carefully unsolder shielding from the underside of the PCB, peel that back, hold it in place so you can get to the legs of the capacitor. Just heat them and gently work the capacitor out. Clean out the holes and install a new capacitor. Following the same procedure for the rest of the caps, we've now got a beautifully recapped PCB. We're also going to change all the buttons and the membrane. That requires us to take the entirety of the inside apart. And that in itself is revealing quite a lot of detritus. I don't know when this spider died, but it's probably sometime between 1995 and the present day. One thing I can say is it's definitely been dead for quite a while. Cleaning everything up with just some window cleaner, that brings the plastic up quite nicely, and the speaker looks, well, less like a spider home. Unfortunately, the holes provided in this circuit board are slightly smaller than the screws. It took me several attempts to actually realise that. The easiest way to solve this problem is to screw the screws through the circuit board first, that holds them in place, and then screw them into the plastic.
After 70 years, that's what he goes there for.
Flashing power and turning this on, something's not quite right. Having a multicoloured border isn't quite what I expected from this screen upgrade. Some considerable time later, mostly by looking at screenshots and pictures of other people having installed this board, for whatever reason, this one's got the debug turned on. Turning the debug off, it works perfectly. Now it's just a matter of putting the whole thing back together and giving it a jolly good test. Acorn, the company behind the BBC Micro, used the 6502 in their computers.
We all want to go with the 6502 processor.
Of course. It's the only choice.
For the moment.
But they wanted something faster, more efficient, and they took the inspiration from Peddle's simple, elegant design philosophy that led to the creation of the Acorn RISC machine, or ARM, which now powers nearly every smartphone and even Apple's latest M-series chips, meaning the humble 6502 may still be in production today, but it's inspired the next generation of processors, and ARM is destined to overtake Intel, set to power most of our desktop machines in the very near future. And just like the 6502, this Atari Lynx is very much alive again. One of the most common problems with the Atari Lynx cartridges, due to the exposed pins, is they suffer from corrosion, and/or fizzy drinks, and cake, and greasy fingers, and anything else that was probably on the hands of a 16 to 17-year-old back in 1990. And all this stands as proof that great processors can outlive expectations, shape industries, and inspire generations. If you found any of this either entertaining or informative, then please consider clicking like. And if you want more videos like this, then why not subscribe to my channel? In the meantime, why don't you check this out next?